if I knew my purpose, I would want to say, hold on to it with all your might. Do not give up. There are a lot of things that will not happen in a short period of time. But if you will be tenacious and you will hold on, eventually they will happen beyond your wildest dreams sometimes. There were things that I dreamed about in my 20s, but I could not have had the character to sustain the dream without going through the persevering years of the pain. The persevering through pain enabled me to have the character to sustain the dream that I currently live.
What are you getting after? What seeds are you planting? What are you overcoming? Think big. Think even bigger. Take some risks. God's got your back. Go for it. Don't hold back. Don't ever have regrets in your life. Go fail. Go grow from those things. Live your life.
Your identity is not defined by your successes or your failures.
If you're not happy where you're at, you won't be happy where you're going. Choose to do the things that will make you the person you want to be, that will make you a better person next week and next year.
You're going to have to leave some things you're actually good at behind so that you can find what you're wired for, what you're born for.
Being a world-class entrepreneur is being in every area of life excellent.
It is the little things that are so easy not to do.
The best thing that you can do is assume the best in people.
I want people around the world to believe they can do something great with their life.
If I build the biggest business, but I destroy my physical body and I lose my health, I don't think that's success. While you're on the journey climbing to success, never forget the things that matter most.
If you like this episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle Show. Second time we are interviewing today's guest, Dr. Rob Reamer. Welcome back to the Heart Healthy Hustle.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good to be back with you.
I went to a leadership conference in New Jersey in, I believe it was January. Rob, you were speaking at that conference. That was a big part of the reason I wanted to go to that conference, having read your book, Soul Care. After hearing you speak in person, as well as the other speakers there, I was inspired to invite you back onto the show. One of the things that you were talking about directly at that conference was dealing with anger and unforgiveness. And I'd love to jump into that topic and really delve deep into that specific topic of damage of the soul. First, just give us a brief glimpse into your personal life. What's going on with your life today?
Well, these days, having written several books and being invited a lot to different places to speak, I'm doing a lot of conference speaking, traveling around the world. I also teach in a graduate and doctoral program, and so I've been doing a lot of speaking, lots of traveling, and my wife comes with me some, and so does one of my kids who's still home. The other three have graduated and or are in college. So it's been a great season of life, actually.
That's really cool. What are some of the things that we can look forward to with that season?
Well, for me, one of the things that's come out of this season is probably just a lot more exposure. You know, when you travel around and you're in different places, different countries, you get a lot more exposure. So there's been lots and lots of more books sold. So that's been fun for me personally. It's also, you get fresh insights. You travel around, you talk to different people, you have fresh insights. And so definitely be some new writing coming out of this season as well.
That's really neat. Looking forward to that. For those listening, you were actually one of the first 20 interviews that we ever did, and I told you this over the email, but it was the top performing episode that the show's ever seen. That was episode 15. It's hard to believe how many interviews have happened since then. Time flies. And some of those interviews, I owe you a huge thank you and gratitude to you for referring Dr. Tim Meyer. He was a fantastic guest we had on.
Nice, great.
And also Dr. Ron Walborn. That was a favorite episode as well. So it's been quite a journey, even just for this show, having you on and the feedback that your episode has received. Thanks for sharing a bit about your present day personal life. If you have a favorite quote, saying you live by, motto, drives you each and every day to keep doing what you're doing, some people might say, dude, chill, why are you traveling around so much? Why are you doing all this? What would you tell them?
One of the things that I would say that's one of my favorite mottos is this: it is cosmic treason to possess the keys of the kingdom and not to utilize them to set the captives free. The keys, really, if you think about keys, they're to unlock things. When people are in chains, there's bondage. You unlock those things and people have freedom. So to possess those keys and not to utilize them really is a cosmic treason.
So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what you mean, hit the rewind button and listen to that again. Next, I would love to jump right into the reason that we got connected again, which is delving into one of the things that I personally struggle with. I think all of us tend to struggle with it in some capacity. One of the things is why anger is still takes a root in my heart, even though a lot of healing has taken place, a lot of restoring, and a lot of wonderful spiritual deliverances have happened in my own life. There's still certain things that I tend to be, even just internally at times, torqued. I like saying torqued. People who deal with it probably understand what that means. Why is that, do you think? You deal with one thing and then the next thing really comes to the surface because you were blind to it before because your lens was cracked, but now that's been restored and you're like, oh, wow, I actually have this huge issue over here I didn't even see before.
Yeah. One of the difficulties in dealing with anger is, often anger is a secondary emotion, right? Anger is the result of something else. My favorite soul care question really to ask is, what's underneath that? So when you're dealing with anger, one of the key questions is really, what's driving it? What's underneath that? You got to get to the roots. Too often, we focus on behavior management, and it's like dealing with the fruits instead of the roots. It's like dealing with the symptoms instead of the disease. And anger really, most of the times, is a symptomatic expression of something else.
A symptomatic expression of something else.
Yeah, there's something underneath it. There's something driving it. So, for example, what are the roots underneath anger? Sometimes the reason why we're having anger is because we're hurt. When people are hurt, a lot of the times they feel anger. That's what you feel. And so for some of us, we've never processed our hurts and we have all this anger. Jonathan, you heard me say this before, but your soul is like a suitcase. I travel all the time. When I take a trip, I have nice, neat, clean, folded clothes in my suitcase. And then when I finish that trip, I just throw everything back in the suitcase because when I get home, it all has to be washed. Well, before I take the next trip, I got to unpack all the dirty junk laundry out of the suitcase before I can pack in nice, neat, clean, folded clothes into the suitcase. Lots of times what we're trying to do is we're trying to just deal with the surface issues without unpacking what's in the suitcase of the soul. If you have a bunch of hurt, there's going to be the surface of anger. That's just one example.
For me, I've faced a lot of the hurt, not just in a self-centered manner, but in a way of community restoration.
It's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So, when I think about anger and I'm thinking about some of the root issues, I think if you're going to unpack the roots, you have to think, what could be underneath that? Yeah, so sometimes it's hurt. Jonathan, sometimes it's shame.
Yeah.
Sometimes the thing that's driving or fueling our anger is shame. When we are embarrassed or somebody shames us, or if we're carrying roots of shame in our soul and then somebody taps them, we're going to have this explosive reaction. Let me use an analogy. Say, for example, you bumped up against my thumb right now, and it wouldn't really hurt. And so I'd just be like, oh, you'd say, oh, I'm sorry. I'd say, oh, don't worry about it, right? But imagine that my thumb had a splinter in it and the splinter had made my thumb infected. And now you bump up against my thumb. I'm going to have this disproportional reaction to the impact. Why? Because there's a wound there and it's festering. That's where a lot of anger shows up. It shows up when we get bumped against soul wounds that have never been addressed. And a lot of times in those wounds, there's hurt that is unprocessed and there's shame that is unprocessed. And when we get hit in those areas, we tend to explode or get torqued, as you said.
I don't know if it's an internal sense of justified anger to call it righteous anger, but when I see injustice, I get sometimes internally torqued and injustice in the smallest ways sometimes, which is a little unfortunate. I guess I have the self-control, but there's certain things like, and you can see it even, let's say you're with friends and someone starts talking about politics and there's that one or two people in the room who just go off and you're just like, just go get a drink of water, relax. Like no one wants to get into it like that right now. Not just politics. There's so many topics that can do that to people. Why do you think, so you have children, what would you even say to them? Why do you think it's important for us to actually take these, for the people who are, oh, I'm just going to keep having fun until I'm 30, 35, whatever, it'll work out. What would you say to them so that they don't just take a passive approach to this and why it's important?
Well, the truth of the matter is this: if you don't unpack the junk that's in the suitcase of your soul, you're going to be in relationship with people and you're carrying all that baggage into those relationships. Well, if you get married when you're 30 and then you have kids, now you're passing that baggage on to your kids because you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are.
Yeah. Wow. So you
teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. So, you're just going to reinforce what you already are in terms of your behaviors. You're going to make that a pattern for your family. The patterns of the family get passed on. So they say the sins of the fathers visit their children, right? The sins of the parents visit their children. You don't deal with your anger, your kids are going to wrestle with it too, of course. You're going to pass it on. So listen, I want to break the chains that have held my family in bondage. That's why I go after this stuff.
Powerful. I can hear some people fervently rebuttal, I'm nothing like my parents. I'm not going to be like them. You'll see. Some other
Which
reaction.
What I would say to you is, Jonathan, you can never gain freedom in rebellion. You can only gain freedom by dealing with the issues at hand. Rebellion can't lead someone to freedom. Listen, if you rebel against something, you're still in bondage to the thing you're rebelling against.
Well, I'm just letting that settle. I can tell that's going to hit some people really hard. Another way people would tend to deal with something like this may be by pouring. This is where the concept of the suitcase is so impactful, is this, in my opinion. Let's just say the vessel is a cup. It's dirty and it's filled with dirty things. I'm trying to use the analogy of pouring. So let's say somebody says, oh, well, here's my cup, which is representation of who I am comprehensively. They put the cup on the table, and it's all filthy, it's all stained and messed up. Someone starts pouring things into the cup, fresh new water that's great, full of life, but it's all just overflowing over the top. Therefore, the stuff that's in the cup isn't changing. It hasn't been removed. And it's just being poured over with all this, it's great new stuff, but you haven't dealt with, you're still rebelling against that healing process that will take you be able to fill your cup with good things, as opposed to putting a Band-Aid over or overflowing or just soaking yourself in new techniques, or even a person of the faith you're trying to get poured into by others and there's no room in there.
Exactly. So lots of people, what they're trying to do is, instead of unpacking the suitcase, they're trying to just keep putting new clothes in the suitcase. Well, listen, that's not going to keep working. Eventually, you're not going to be able to put anything new in unless you take out the old stuff. And the reality is the old stuff, if it's smelly and dirty, is going to contaminate the new stuff. And now your new stuff's going to smell like a gym locker.
You got to get that BO out of there.
You gotta.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I still battle with that a bit. Thinking, okay, well, because there's like roughly two categories of books that I really like. One is more spiritual, soulful, helpful to my inner man, and then the other set of books, personal development, how to have better habits, things like that, right? And it's a constant battle of, all right, am I in the chapter or season of life where I need to be reading these things that are restorative, or that I can read things that will increase my productivity and efficiency or performance in my career? And there's this constant push and pull of, it's really interesting. There is that desire to pour new good things in. And then there's also the part of me that's like, dude, you need to sharpen your shovel and shovel more of those clothes out of there,
Yeah, well, and it's tricky. And honestly, if you even just think about what you were talking about, like that can be one of the symptomatic expressions of anger in our lives. We're all too busy. And time management leads us often to angry outbursts, right? So if I don't schedule enough time for everything I need for a well-balanced life, then what happens is I'm trying to get someplace, and now there's traffic and I can't get there, and I didn't leave enough time to get there because I'm trying to fill too many things in my life, and now I'm irritated as all get out because there's people in the way and they're interfering with my goal, and I'm annoyed. But really the problem is I just don't have enough margin in my life.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, for lots of us, we're getting irritated because we have run too fast. We're running at the speed of light. By the way, that's one of the reasons why we miss stuff that accumulates in our suitcase, like hurt. We get hurt, but we don't have time to process our hurt because we're running too fast. If we don't take time to slow down, to do a little inventory, a little reflection, a little silence, a little solitude, a little place where you can actually kind of slow it all down and let the water settle, if you use the image of a cup. And now the cup's all stirred up because of the busyness, right? But when the water settles, all the dirt settles to the bottom.
What are some tactical methods that we can use to let the water settle? For me, I understand the importance of it now, so I can implement it just for the fear of the alternative not being attractive to me. But for those of us who are still looking at that and just saying, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm not, I really just, oh, there's my kid screaming. Okay, I have to cut this interview off for now and I maybe never finish it. People have so little time to take a healthy, managed approach to their schedule, but let alone that. I think there's a spiritual rhythm as well that's at play, that once you notice that spiritual rhythm or the ripples in the water, you recognize the need. For me, that's what happens. One of the big things I've been focusing on recently with music is that can evoke or initiate that spiritual rhythm disrupt that you were not even aware of the need to initiate that time of reflection.
Yeah. For me, one of the big practices that's real important for me is just silence. Silence somehow or another, when I spend time just in quiet, like I get up, I sit, I look out, my house is overlooking a lake, and I'll sit there and the water is always perfectly still. And I don't need an hour in silence. A lot of times I'll spend 15 minutes, 10 minutes, but literally those 10, 15 minutes just help me slow down all the RPMs, man. We can get running really fast. And then I just take a little time to reflect. Is there anything in the suitcase that I haven't processed? Is there hurt that I haven't dealt with? Is there anger? If there is anger, what's underneath that? What's driving it? And, so if you take time to slow it all down, let the water settle, and then look at the stuff that fell out at the bottom and reflect. And, for those of us, who are looking to God to give us some help on this stuff, the Holy Spirit can give you wisdom about that stuff that falls out at the bottom. He can say, hey, I know what's underneath that. And so all of a sudden, if you're really seeking help, God can drop thoughts into your mind to help you sort some of this stuff out. And then sometimes you need some other resource people around you, good friends, people that have some wisdom that you can talk through those things and just say, hey, man, I'm like getting really ticked off a lot lately, and I'm not sure what's underneath that. I can see it's there, but I need to figure it out. Can I talk through this with you so I can help sort it out?
Even for me as a man, that's tough because most men don't want to go there. But you don't want to talk about it with your romantic partner. You want to actually talk about that with a bro, typically with a brother.
Yeah, so Jonathan, one of the things I would say is I've had to make a choice in my life to live with real honesty and real community with a few people. And the way it started, I didn't have people like that in my life. You know what that meant? It meant I had to find people. I had to develop friendships like that, which meant I had to start to take risks. So, you don't share everything that's wrong with you in the first meeting. You'll probably scare everybody to death. So instead, you just sort of slowly unpack it. You take one piece out of the suitcase and you hand it to somebody and go, hey, I'm wrestling with this thing. And you're honest and you're open, and you'll watch how they react. You measure it. You evaluate, were they trustworthy? Were they honorable with that thing? But if they go out and talk to a bunch of people and it comes back to me, that's the last time I'm going to trust them with a piece of my luggage. But if they're really honorable, they treat me with empathy, and yet they're engaged and they reciprocate some vulnerability, then guess what? I'm building true friendship. So, you know what? Another day we're sitting around talking and I take another piece out. And I'm like, hey, I'm wrestling with this. And you keep having these conversations. If they continue to be honorable and faithful to the trust that you're giving them, then all of a sudden you have a real friend. And then you can really unpack with that person.
That second unpacking is really scary. I've done that before. What do you say if they don't honor that second unpacking that's much more true and vulnerable and deeper? If they simply put up a wall because they're like, oh, I don't want any part of someone whose life is like this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So listen, Jonathan, right? We only have 4 tools that we can use in a relationship with someone to really help change things. So let's say they were not faithful to the trust, and now you're really hurt, right? They told someone else, and you're really burned by this thing. So I have 4 tools. Here's my first tool. This is true when I'm in a conflict with my wife. It's true when I'm concerned about behaviors for a really good friend or one of my children. I have 4 tools. Here's the first tool. First, I can have a conversation with that person. I love the description in John chapter 1 about Jesus. It says, Jesus was full of truth and full of grace. That's a beautiful description. I want you to notice he doesn't say it's a balance. He didn't have a balance between truth and grace. There wasn't a tension between truth and grace in Jesus' life. He was full of truth and full of grace. That means every conversation Jesus had, when he was speaking a fully truthful conversation, he was still as full of grace as he was full of truth. When he was being incredibly merciful towards someone, deeply compassionate and empathetic towards someone, full of grace, he was still every bit as full of truth. That's a beautiful image. If we could be both magnanimous, which is the fullness of grace, and courageous, which is the fullness of truth, then I can lay out what I want from you. So I sit down with that person already having decided that I'm going to forgive them for being unfaithful to the trust, but I'm going to have a conversation with them and I'm going to say to them, hey man, you violated my trust. This is a big deal to me. If we're going to be friends, that's not going to be able to go on. I've already forgiven you, but this can't happen again. And so I'm going to have a fullness of truth and fullness of grace conversation with them. Listen, if conversation does not move someone towards change, I only have 3 tools left in my handbag. I can love, wait, and pray. That's all I got left. But what I can tell you is, and if it's a conversation where it's like level 2, like you're talking about, I'm not going to invest that much in it. If it's my wife, there's some stuff that I might want, and she might say no. I've expressed my expectation, right? But I can't get her to agree with me about this expectation. So when that happens, I have that fullness of truth, fullness of grace. But you see, opting out's not an option for me. So now what? Now I love, wait, and pray. I have to give up having the conversation. If I keep having the conversation, I'm trying to cajole her, manipulate her, coerce her. So I got to give it up after I've done the fullness of truth and fullness of grace. And now I need to love, wait, and pray. This is what expectation management's all about. So one of the reasons why we get angry is because we have an expectation of another person. They don't fulfill it. Yeah. And now I'm angry because you didn't fulfill my expectation.
What if you're not angry, you're just hurt?
But are you angry under it? You know, when the hurt shows up, are you also angry? I don't know about you, but lots of times, bro, when I get hurt, I'm also angry.
Yeah, that's a good point. Telling someone you violated the trust I gave you is a powerful set of words that most people don't know how to handle. And I'm not making this up, virtually every conversation that I've had, even in a very calm state and initiating it by that full of grace and, grace and truth, before presenting the truth, presenting the grace and the understanding that, hey, like, I'm not angry with you, just want you to know, then the truth. I try to forget all these things, but even in times where I've done that with a calm spirit and say something to the effect of, you violated the trust I gave you, if we're going to be friends, that can't keep. The reactions that I get are almost always just to blow it off or to literally not, they literally do not respond with words, if at all. They'll literally blow it off or just be like, well, it's not a big deal, whatever. And they'll change the subject immediately, especially with men. I've noticed this. And it's rare that you ever have these conversations, but specifically with people who you trust and you guys are at that level 2, 3. And is that a situation where you walk away?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, multiple answers, right? So first, some people are not going to say anything. Then I might press in and just say, do you have any response? So this is part of truth. I'm pushing. Here's the question that you have to ask in a relationship like this, Jonathan. How important is a relationship to you? Listen, if this is my, wife or one of my best friends, I'm going to go to the ends of the earth to try to resolve this thing. Okay. I mean, these are your best friends, right?
Yeah,
if this is someone who is someone I'm meeting one day and I shared something with them and they violated it, honestly, I might just forgive them and move on. And I just think, I'm not going to share anything with that person again.
Yeah.
But I don't really care because I don't have much at stake in the relationship, right? But if there's something at stake in the relationship, if it matters to me and I really want it to go to the next level, well, it's not going to go there unless I'm willing to speak the fullness of truth and the fullness of grace. So I might press in a little bit. Now, I'll give you another scenario, though. A lot of times what happens is the person doesn't blank out on you. The person blows up on you. They get defensive, which is also pretty common. You have a conversation with some people and they get defensive. That can happen. And for me personally, what I try to do, believe me, I don't do this perfectly. What I try to do is I try actually to anticipate the person's response. So I think to myself, okay, if the person totally shuts down, what am I going to do? I'm not going to filibust. I'm not going to get nervous. I'm not going to, sort of fill in the conversation with a bunch of nonsense. I'm not going to just change topics. I'm going to press in because this one matters to me. And so I'm going to press in. If they don't say anything, I'm going to press in. If they blow up, if they get real defensive, I'm going to put on my listening shoes. Instead of pressing in, I'm going to back up and I'm going to listen. I'm going to say, okay, so I can see you're upset too. Tell me what you're upset about. Let me listen. Why? Because I'm the most prepared person for this conversation. The other person has had no space to prepare for this conversation. Here's what used to happen to me in my marriage, right? I'd want to talk to Jen about something I was upset about. I would bring it to her. I'd say, well, I'm really upset about A. And she would get all upset and she'd say, well, I'm all upset about B, or whatever. And then I would get defensive because she's not listening to me and she'd get defensive and we'd escalate the conversation. We wouldn't get anywhere. And then, we just kind of let things simmer down over a few days, but we'd never actually resolve stuff. And finally, I realized, the best thing is I'm the one who is coming in, bringing this topic up. So I'm the one that's actually most prepared. So that means I'm the one who can make sure I feel secure because I'm deeply loved by God. I feel safe. I can be calm. I can be the one who is prepared for her response to be defensive. Because if someone brings something up to me, I might be defensive too. So I'm like, I'm going to be prepared. And when she gets defensive, I'm going to listen. And then here's what happened. I look at her and I'd say to her, sweetheart, so what I hear you saying is 3 things. And I'd repeat them to her and she'd say, yeah, that's right. And I'd say, okay, I got it. And I'd own whatever I could. Yeah, I can own 1 and 2 there. That's true about me. You're right. Third one, I don't really feel that's true. And then you know what? Because I'm owning stuff, it takes all the wind out of her sails. And then she'd look at me and I would say to her, sweetheart, now I listened to you. Can we go back to the beginning of the conversation, the thing that I brought up, topic A there? And would you listen to me with dignity like I listened to you? You know what? She generally would then.
Going into it, understanding that you're probably more prepared than the other party in the conversation is helpful.
Yeah, because you have thought about it. You've prepared your thoughts. You've prepared your words. You've prepared, hopefully, your heart to be in the right place. So if you take time to prepare, you're the one that should be ready for the response. And then you can react with truth and grace in the response. So now what I try to do is go into those things and say, I'm not going to escalate. I'm not going to get defensive, but I'm not going to give up on truth either. I'm going to try to do this with the fullness of truth and the fullness of grace. What would that look like?
I feel like most of us aren't good at communicating.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that.
Maybe
Which,
not.
if you think about it, does cause a lot of our anger, right? We get hurt, we get embarrassed, we get shamed in conversations. We feel, somebody has in some way or another insulted us. Happens to all of us.
I heard a quote that helped me to diffuse when I was way more reactive stage of my life, which was, disrespect is not an embarrassment to you.
Yes.
And although that is a true statement logically, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't still feel embarrassment or garner some embarrassment in some way.
Yes. And so, again, part of the question, when I feel embarrassed, shamed, disrespected, and I feel that my face flushes and I feel this surge of power within me, which is both anger, shame, embarrassment, and also like defensiveness, then, even if I don't respond, don't say anything in the moment, when I go home that next day and I spend time alone in silence and solitude, I'm going to unpack that. I'm going to say to myself, what's underneath that? Why did I have that reaction? Why do I feel so embarrassed by this? Why do I feel so angry? What's the shame that I feel connected to this? What's this all about?
Transitioning, Rob, I want to ask you a personal question. How do you deal with building community with people or even just other men for brotherhood, friendships, and community? I know you keep a pretty tight circle for hard-charging individuals, for people who have a mission. They're actually living out a purpose, and they live a life full of zest because of that, passionate, driven. Many times this can lead to alienating you from the masses because people are quick to judge or quick to envy and quick to look at what you're doing and say, well, I'm not doing that, so there must be something wrong with me or them. And it's easier to say there's something wrong with them than it is with me, even though it's not even true. There might be nothing wrong with either of you. How do you deal with that, being a man more so in a spotlight at times just due to the fact that you've written books and you are speaking frequently, and you are also a professor, right, at a seminary, is that right?
Yes, true.
So how do you deal with that, coming against that, almost that spiritual warfare of whether it's envy or just judgmental alienation? How do you deal with that? I mean, it's an incredibly painful thing. I think a lot of people go through and don't talk about it very much.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, first, Jonathan, it always hurts. You're real. You're a person. I mean, I have people write stuff against me publicly. I've had radio shows done against me. YouTube videos, podcasts done against me. I had somebody, long ago develop an imaginary Facebook page, with an imaginary name, friend to everybody in my church, and write against me. That's the only reason they did it, was so they could write against me. And, I've had blogs done against me. And first it hurts. So you know what? Once again, I get alone with God and I process that thing in that space in solitude and silence. And I actually write stuff out in a prayer journal. I write it out. I get it all up and out of the suitcase, man. I want to unpack. Pretty much I'm unpacking stuff every week. That's just life. And so you're going to get hurt. You got to unpack. That's just what you do. So I got to unpack. I feel hurt. I feel anger, I feel defensive, I feel all that stuff, and then I decide I'm not going to act on that stuff. And so I don't retaliate, I don't write back, I don't respond to those people in those kinds of ways. I've decided I'm not going to do that. And so I just choose not to. And one of the things that I've chosen to do is I took Jesus up on his words. Jesus makes the completely counterintuitive statement. He says, you're to love your enemies and bless those who curse you. Well, listen, man, it is natural to hate your enemies and curse those who curse you. Nobody wants to love their enemies and bless those who curse you. In another conversation Jesus has with his disciples, he makes this point. He says, listen, even people far from God love their friends. That's no credit to you. But the single greatest mark, ultimately, of your relationship, an authentic relationship with a loving God who gave his son for you on a cross, is that you are marked by love, even for your enemies. And so you have to make a choice that you're going to choose in to do the hard things. And if you're going to follow Jesus, you're choosing in to follow the God of the cross. That means you're going to choose some hard things. And so for me, that means I bless everybody who curses me, literally. When somebody curses me, I pray blessings on them. The things that I want in my life that are good things, I pray for them. I want my wife to love me, I pray it for them. I want to have peace in my soul, I pray they'll have peace. I want to have joy, I pray they'll have joy, etc. And so I literally bless every single person who I find writes against me, speaks against me, does something wrong against me. I literally pray blessings on everyone who curses me.
Especially when you're a spiritual person, it's easy to be like, it's actually much more of a lesson will be taught if you pray blessings on on those who curse you, aka haters.
Well, and even more important, honestly, I have found, Jonathan, it unpacks my suitcase.
How so?
When I do it, what I have discovered is this: if you will do what God tells you to do, God will do what you cannot do. He will change your heart.
That's powerful. For those listening who are like, yeah, it's cool, I don't believe in God, my biggest thing is the reason for God. If there's such atrocity in the world, I asked Dr. Walborn this question. I have a friend, actually. He was in the military. He's in the National Guard. I think he still is. He's studying for CFA, I believe, in Boston College. He's a very bright guy. But he was not, he embraced atheism wholeheartedly. And then he read a book called Reason for God. Mm-hmm. And that changed everything for him. But yeah, what's your answer to that question? There's so much injustice. If there's a God, there's no way he's loving.
So my answer really is pretty simple. I don't understand everything that happens in the world that's wrong. But what I can tell you is I know God is good because of the cross. God did not sit aloof in heaven watching human injustice, pain, suffering, and all the evil on the planet. And he didn't sit there indifferent and unmoved. He entered our plight. He became one of us. He suffered with us. He demonstrated compassion. So when you feel injustice, you are fighting with God, not against him. He hates injustice. That's why Jesus came. That's why he died on a cross. That's why he came preaching the message that there's a kingdom that is coming that can invade earth now as people do right and overcome injustice, and that one day there will be no more evil, there will be no more hatred, there will be no more racism, there will be no more sin, no more pain, and no more warfare, no more poverty, none of that stuff, because all the evil stuff in the world will be finally overcome. And so that's kind of how I make sense of it all.
Have you read much in Friedrich Nietzsche?
I have not read much of Nietzsche, no.
Me and a group of friends went to Portland recently to talk to people on the street about what they believe and why and things like this. And one guy I was speaking with was an atheist, and I challenged him about somebody had said that to say there absolutely cannot be, there is no God is actually academically arrogant because you can't actually know, so therefore you should just identify as agnostic. I found that interesting. But he said, yeah, well, in that case, then I'm agnostic. And then he brought up Beyond Good and Evil. Then he got into how he wrote like this, and his entire thesis was on the problem of good and evil. But it was a really impactful conversation for me in general. Like Dallas Willard, have you read a lot of him?
I have.
Because I haven't, and I feel like where's a good place to start for that?
Well, I mean, he's got lots of great stuff out there. His book,
The Divine Conspiracy, I heard.
Yeah. That was a terrific read.
Okay.
One of the things that I would say is when I'm dealing with somebody, Jonathan, that's an atheist, one of the things I always ask them is just tell me their story. Yeah. Because honestly, what I really hear when I listen to their story is they're kind of hurt and angry at God if he existed. So they've written him off as he didn't exist because of the pain in their story. For lots of times, not everybody, but lots of times I do hear that theme coming through. And honestly, I want to be an empathetic person. So yeah. I listen to them and I feel their pain. And I think, yeah, I mean, if I had lived their life, I might believe what they believe too, just because of the sheer pain factor.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It's true. So deeper into the problem of anger, I feel like it's, and even selfishly, one of the big reasons I want to just nip this in the bud and get rid of it is that, yeah, I mean, anger will present itself throughout my life at times, but not like there's certain things that anger me and torque me to a level that they shouldn't still to this day, even though I think I understand fullness of truth and grace, and I think I understand certain things. So should I go see a counselor, or because that's actually on my list. Like I don't really have in my mind a traumatic upbringing that I should need to go see a counselor, but I do know after speaking with you, talking with people like Dr. Walborn about the power of grieving and the importance of grieving. You just said you unpack weekly with daily. Is that something that just has to be there to help mitigate any anger manifesting, or is there a way to really get that root issue? And I love that you brought up the power of the Holy Spirit to reveal those things to you, that sediment that can settle after you pour the water out, if you take a time to reflect and take some time to really just ask for wisdom and discernment around that. From your life experience thus far, and that being said, I'm not sure what is the foothold or what is the stronghold that is allowing it to remain in my life. It's just a frustrating thing because I believe that anger holds people back. It really holds them down, holds them back. You ever seen those net guns where in a spy movie, they'll shoot out a net from a gun and it'll pin somebody to the wall? That's what I feel like anger does. Like you're running, and if you allow that anger to manifest, it's like a net just nails you to the wall and you can't move and you're just squirming until you chill out.
Yeah, so several things. First, this is why Paul talks about don't let the sun go down on your anger, and in so doing, give the devil a foothold. What he's saying is, listen, you got to process this stuff in your life or it's really going to end up in bondage. And so you got to go after it. Again, what I would say to you is this. I can't give you a direct answer, but what I can tell you is this. Most of us, if you just understand the narrative of your life, both past and present. If you understand the narrative, you'll understand a lot of the anger. You can connect the dots. See, nobody's present situation and present issues are divorced from their story. For example, let me tell you a story to help you illustrate this. And I was wrestling with anger a lot right before I left my church, and I left in 2017. And boy, I was so angry. My wife came to me one day and she says to me, and she's real gentle, right? She speaks really, really softly to me. She goes, "Do you realize you're really angry these days?" And I was real soft back. And I said to her, "Yeah, why do you say that? I haven't been mean to you or anything." And she goes, no, you haven't. And I said, "So why do you say that?" She goes, "Anybody near you can kind of feel it radiating from you." And I said to her, "Yes, I'm very aware of it." And she goes, "Why are you angry?" I said, "I have no idea." See, part of my problem, and this is part of my narrative, right? But part of my problem is when I feel weak emotion, I feel anger. It doesn't matter what the weak emotion is. If I feel fear, I feel anger. If I feel grief, I feel anger. If I feel sadness, I feel anger. I actually don't feel the weak emotions. I feel anger. If I feel shame, I feel anger. So in that particular case, it took me probably 2, 3, 4 months at least to unpack the suitcase because there were multiple layers to my anger. So again, every day I'm journaling, I'm praying, I'm in silence, I'm in solitude, I'm reflecting, I'm doing all this stuff to try to figure out what's underneath that. And by the way, I'm talking to people, wise people, right? People that are my friends who know me well. And one of the things that I discovered was, first, there was fear there. I was moving to a position that was going to be half my salary. And for the first time in my life, I really felt financial fear. And that made me angry. Okay. Second, I was leaving the church, so there was a lot of grief there and, sadness. And I was leaving behind 20 some odd year relationships. And so, but there was a lot of sadness and grief. And there, when I feel these weak emotions, I feel anger. So I unpacked the sadness and the grief and I unpacked the fear. I surrendered that, got through that, was good. I was still angry. And I'm like, why am I still angry? What's underneath that? And I had shame. And I had shame because I felt like there were things that I wanted to accomplish and that I didn't get accomplished while I was there as a pastor. And I felt like a failure. And that made me feel shame. And I had to own that. And I spoke to my church directly about it. I did it on a sermon on a Sunday morning. I talked to them about the things that I regretted, the things that I wanted to see that we had dreamed about that we didn't see. And I owned my stuff and I apologized. You know what was funny? I had a guy come up to me afterwards. He goes, "Man, that must have been really hard to do." And I said, "No, it wasn't. It wasn't hard to do because I did the work alone with God. I unpacked it. And as long as you've unpacked it, you take the power out of it." And see, that's the thing. You got to unpack this stuff, Jonathan. So you got to look inside and go, what's underneath this stuff? And so the answer to whether or not you go to counseling is whether or not you can unpack it alone or with a group of friends, or whether you need some professional help to unpack that stuff. That's really the key.
The weak emotion concept is remarkable. Is there a clinical name to put to that neurological bypassing of the weak emotions just directly to anger?
I don't know that for sure, but what I can tell you in me is it's just part of my personality. I don't know if that's a type A personality thing, Enneagram 8, I don't know, whatever sort of device you want to use to measure it. But all it is, buddy, is I just got issues. That's all. Join the human family.
Yeah, welcome to being human. Yeah. Interesting. Jump right into the Heart Healthy Hustle round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions based on the title of this show. Are you ready, Rob?
Go.
Heart. What activity do you use to care for and strengthen your internal character?
1, reading. Do a ton of reading. And I read 150, 200 books a year. 2, I do spend time alone with God a lot. Silence, solitude, retreat space. And 3, I make sure that I'm having a lot of fun in life.
What are some of your favorite ways to have fun?
Hanging out with my wife, taking cool trips with her, with my family, hanging out with good friends, and I love elite cigars.
What's your favorite type of cigar?
Padrones.
I bet you enjoy having a Padron while you're overlooking the water.
You betcha.
All day. Nice. You got to check out gas go-karts that go like 45 miles per hour. You get a group of friends together and go do that. That makes out for a killer time.
Awesome.
Health. How do you maintain your physical health and avoid burnout?
So physically, I am trying to bike regularly. Last year, I ended up with a hip injury, and as a result of the hip injury, I didn't bike for the last 6 months of last year. So I have been doing some biking inside on a recumbent bike, but I'm looking forward to getting back outside here, and the weather's turning. I've got to do a little repair work on my bike, and I'll be back out on my bike.
Do you ride 5 miles at a time? What's your typical regimen?
Usually 20 miles.
Yeah, that's a workout. Hustle. What's your main motivation for doing what you do?
A couple things. 1, my life has been changed, really. And my relationship with Jesus has changed me. And I have gotten free from stuff. And as a result, my life is way better, man. My marriage is, we've been married for 29 years. We're in the best 5 years of our marriage. This has been the single best year of our marriage. It keeps getting better. And I know the healthier you get, the healthier relationships you have, the better you feel, the better life is, the more contribution you make. And I want to see everybody have that kind of a healthy soul. And if you can have a healthy soul, you'll have a better life.
And more joy.
Way more.
What's an encouraging word you can share with somebody? What's an encouraging word you'd share with somebody? They know in their gut they need to cut ties with some people in their life.
Everybody's worthy of love. Not everybody is worthy of an investment.
Wow. I may make t-shirts with that quote, just a warning. Where did your commitment to excellence come from?
Probably my home life growing up. 1, that was something, that I can remember my dad saying when I was younger. Some of it's just drivenness. Some of that stuff comes from good motivation, love for God, love for people, love for life. And then some of that stuff over the years has come from bad motivation, like, stuff like shame that I've had to unpack. Shame can make you a pretty driven individual.
Yeah, we talked about that. Our last interview, you spoke about how there's a lot of power people draw from the shame. A lot of investors who you have worked with on Wall Street, for example, who are being driven completely by shame.
Yeah, it's a powerful motivation. Some people live off that anger, man. Shame fuels them and they love it. It helps them to drive and succeed. But it does burn you out.
What do you mean?
Oh, it just drains the heck out of you. You can't keep living off of that without doing interior damage to your soul. Listen, if you pump unhealthy fuel for your car, sooner or later it's going to do some damage to your engine.
A lot of people might say, well, I'm pouring a lot of good stuff in there, so I'm fine. Good
luck on that.
I was reading a book, and it said, basically it was paraphrased as, the greed for money steals life from the soul.
No, it's a lot of true. The love of money is the root of all evil.
Not money itself, but the love of money.
No, love of money.
I don't understand how so many people mix that up. They're completely different concepts.
Radically.
Yeah. Are you using any tech tools or software tools to help keep your schedule in order?
Ironically, my wife is helping me run my life lots now, and that's helpful. And then other than that, man, I just use an iPhone and just use the calendar that's on there and all that stuff and just coordinate with that. And so just those 2 things.
Do you have three influential books?
One is an ancient classic. It is by a man named Fenelon, Francois Fenelon. And the book is called Let Go. And it's a spiritual book. He's a monk, actually. And 16th century, I think it was. Maybe 17th century. Anyhow, the book ought to have been subtitled, Just Shut Up and Die.
Oh, go ahead.
There is no peace without surrender.
Listening allows you to multitask. Let's say you're driving to work. You're running errands, cleaning up on a Saturday, whatever you're doing. And that's why I've reached out to audible.com. I became an Audible affiliate so you can get a free audiobook. I use Audible for many of my audiobooks, tremendous selection of. So if you don't want to spend a monthly subscription to Audible, put in your name and email, at which point you can listen to that audiobook, keep it forever, and cancel your subscription before 30 days so that you don't get charged for a monthly subscription. This way you get a free book. Go to triplehaudiobook.com. That's HHHaudiobook.com. Second one.
Second one for me. So one of my all-time favorite books really was The Gift of Being Yourself by David Benner. That was a really helpful book for me in a season of my life when I was unpacking the soul and sort of straightening out identity issues in my life, sort of knowing that I'm deeply loved by God and so forth.
That was David Fenner?
Benner, Benner, David Benner, a helpful tool for me. And then the last one I would give you, and this one just sort of my fun kick stuff, but I love biographies. My two favorite people to read biographies on are Churchill and Lincoln. And so one of my all-time favorite biographies, Martin Gilbert wrote a biography on Churchill that is brilliant. So he has like an 8-volume biography on Churchill, but he actually has a 1-volume of it. So if you're not terribly ambitious, read the 1-volume one. It's plenty and well worth sorting through. It's really brilliant.
How'd you come to read so many books in 1 year? You said over 200 typically?
Yeah, so I'll read between 150, 200 books a year and some years more. When I was young, I had a goal to read 100 books a year, and I was hitting about 40, and I realized, you can't make that big goal without breaking it into smaller chunks. So I thought, well, if I read 50 pages a day, I could get to 100 books a year, and sure enough, I got to 100 books the first year. I just made a commitment. I'm an extremely disciplined individual, right? So I just I'm going to do that, and so I did it. And then, honestly, getting to 200 was just kind of accidental. I just started listening to audiobooks while I was riding my bike, while I was driving, while I was walking through airports, and so on and so forth, just redeeming time instead of wasting time. I just started redeeming all the time that was just going by. When I did, I immediately doubled my book output.
People say reading changes your life. Did you notice a lot of benefit, or was it just a little bit of overwhelm with information?
You know what's funny? I would have said to you in the beginning, probably not a ton of benefit necessarily, except for, individual learnings that were helpful in the moment. But I would say 15 years in of serious reading, I felt a convergence. It was like one day I stood up and I was speaking on some stuff and I went, my words have more weightiness. All of these disciplines I've put into my life for 15 years are paying off.
Wow. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. Did I use the wrong word?
I'm not sure. It seems
That's
correct.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
That is what I meant.
Oh, no, you said convergence. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that is what I meant.
Before asking you the conclusion question for the show, I want to jump on unforgiveness because that's big brother of anger, I feel. Unforgiveness, resentment, bitterness. So many of us, we find ways to, no matter what you say you believe, a lot of people, a justification of bitterness, a justification of unforgiveness. Are there signs that we can look for in our souls or our own hearts that unforgiveness gives out? Like, are there pieces of unforgiveness or fragments of unforgiveness that will show up in our lives that we could be, oh, wow, I might be dealing with some unforgiveness towards, I don't even remember who, but yeah, it's probable.
Yeah, so let me give you several symptoms of unforgiveness. One, sometimes, again, you'll have these bursts of anger. We've been talking about that, and so sometimes the anger outburst and the radiating anger is connected to hurt and unforgiveness. Sure. Second, sometimes unforgiveness, bitterness, is actually going to turn inwards on you. You'll hold on to it, and it'll end up showing up as depression. That's not uncommon. And so for lots of people who wrestle with depression, not everybody, okay, but a lot of depression can be helped significantly by doing a real intentional deep dive to make sure you're processing your hurts and you're forgiving people who have deeply hurt you. And so that's one of the symptomatic expressions sometimes is depression. And then, honestly, just think about it, but some of it is, let's say it's a singular individual, it's one person in your life. Just think about some of the ways you'll avoid that person. You'll try to avoid them. You'll dodge them. You'll ditch them. You'll avoid them. You'll see them in a grocery store and duck behind the aisle. You'll ignore their phone calls or texts or whatever. And then sometimes you'll speak ill of them. You'll be in a conversation and somebody will be saying something good about them and you'll want to kind of jab them a little and say something negative. And so you kind of watch the stuff that leaks out of your soul. And those are some of the leakages of an unforgiving soul.
To avoid confusing boundaries with unforgiveness, when you mentioned like the dodging of people, are you saying that if you were even in a healthy boundary where you were, a person was no longer worthy of an investment, not love, but an investment, that is different than unforgiveness, right?
Yeah, so think about the difference between a boundary and a shield, okay? The problem with shield like anger or bitterness or unforgiveness. The problem with a shield is indiscriminate. Not only does it block out the person who I perceive as trying to hurt me or has hurt me, it also blocks out other people. I just leave it up all the time. It's a shield. And it blocks out God from healing the wounded places of my soul. So that's a problem with a shield. A boundary is different. A shield also, it lowers everybody to the lowest level of dysfunction in the room. So if somebody yells at me, I yell back or completely withdraw from the person. I'm actually allowing the lowest level of dysfunction to engage my involvement in this relationship. Okay. But boundary actually elevates the relationship to the highest level of functionality possible. So again, this is where that truth and grace thing comes in. I go and have a conversation with someone and, they're hurting me and I am going to speak 100% of the truth, but I'm going to do it in grace, the fullness of truth and the fullness of grace for the hope of a change for them and for me. But if they don't respond and they continue to hurt, then I'm going to put up a boundary. But the boundary is I'm not going to stoop to their level. I'm not going to yell and scream. I'm not going to just withdraw and pout. I have said what I needed to say in love and in truth. And now I can set up a healthy boundary. So, for example, somebody comes into my office, one day and just feels the need to yell and scream at me and call me names. I'll look at the person and say to them, listen, I'm sure what you're saying is important and I'd like to listen to you. But unfortunately, the way you're saying it is toxic to my soul. So if you could dial that back and say it with dignity and respect, which is the way I will treat you, then I'm willing to listen. And if the person isn't willing to, then the conversation's over. Listen, I gave them an opportunity to elevate to a higher level of functionality. And if they continue to move in dysfunction, then I'm going to put up a very clear boundary.
I love that. That's actually very healthy.
No, actually, I'm trying to invite them into a healthier space.
They can choose whether or not to accept that blessing, really.
That's exactly right. And if they choose not to, that's okay. But, I'm not going to engage at that level of dysfunction either.
Wow. Well, Robin, it's been a really jam-packed interview, really good stuff. Going to ask you the park bench paradigm. The park bench paradigm question, if you could go back in time, you see your younger 20-something-year-old self, you're in a restless transition period of life. I say the word restless because you're driven, you're ready for achieving excellence, pursuing your purpose, but you haven't discovered it yet. Or you have, and you need encouragement. What would you tell him if you could put your arm around your own shoulder? If you had 60 seconds, what would you say to him and why?
One of the things that I would want to say is this. If I knew my purpose, I would want to say, hold on to it with all your might. Do not give up. There are a lot of things that will not happen in a short period of time. But if you will be tenacious and you will hold on, eventually they will happen beyond your wildest dreams sometimes. And it's worth the wait. So give yourself to the task with due diligence, with perseverance, and with a good attitude, and things will, work through most of the times. You do the right things, most of the times you get the right results.
That's very powerful. Why would you say that?
Because I know how hard life is.
Yeah.
And when you're in your 20s, you're idealistic, and a lot of times you don't know the pain that's going to come. And then the pain comes, and for a lot of people, they give up on their dreams because the pain became so great. Listen, I'm living my dream, literally. There were things that I dreamed about in my 20s, but I could not have had the character to sustain the dream without going through the persevering years of the pain. The persevering through pain enabled me to have the character to sustain the dream that I currently live. And I am so grateful I stayed the course.
Dr. Rob Reamer, thank you so much for coming back on the show for round 2. What a way to end the show. How can the audience connect with you after the show?
So you Google my name, Dr. Rob Reamer, that's Reimer, and you'll come to my website, which is Renewal Ministry International. If you Google that, you'll also find me on Amazon and all kinds of other places with books.
What's getting you out of bed currently? What's exciting you in the morning?
I am loving life, loving my wife, loving what I'm doing, having the time of my life, man.
That's awesome. We'll stay the course. I just want to acknowledge you for everything you are doing. I see a lot of the good things that are coming from your work, so I appreciate you, and I hope that you keep pressing on. So thank you.
Thanks, buddy. It was a pleasure to be with you again, and thanks for what you're doing out there.
Congratulations on making it to the end of this episode. What about this episode stood out to you? Next, I need your help sharing this show. I want this podcast to impact and reach 6,000 people per episode by August 31st, 2019. And I want us to reach 15,000 people per month by March 29th, 2020. Have you been enjoying multiple episodes of The Heart Healthy Hustle? I'm thrilled to share with you an exclusive invitation to join our new Facebook community. To get to know other Heart Healthy Hustlers, simply go to thehearthealthyhustle.com/Facebook, where you can expect to see different members of our community being featured weekly in Facebook Live calls. I appreciate all of your love and support, and I will see you in the next episode. As always, be generous on every occasion. There is a story for you, and live wide open.